By now, you've probably heard it.
This woke ideology.
Weak and woke.
Wokeism.
Over
Woke lunacy.
and over
Woke beliefs and policies.
and over again. Woke has become a charged political catch-all phrase, often used as a battering ram and a battle cry, and to many, a slur.
It's almost another way of saying black. It's another way of saying the N-word.
They weaponized the civil rights movement and said it was a communist movement.
Before it was a pejorative, woke was about black safety and empowerment. In the early 20th century, when Jim Crow had its grip on America, white supremacist danger and violence was a constant threat. So black folks had to keep their eyes open, literally and figuratively. They had to stay woke. But what's the real actual definition of the term woke?
It's to be awake to what's happening around you, particularly when it comes to systemic injustice.
The roots of woke run deep to the heart of Black America's fight for equality. In the 1930s, bluesman Huddie Ledbetter, aka Leadbelly, penned a protest song in honor of the Scottsboro Boys, a group of black teens falsely accused in Alabama of raping two white women.
Scottsboro Boys, they can tell you what it's all about.
I advise everybody to be a little careful when they go along through that, but stay woke, keep their eyes open.
And since then, it has become part of the cultural lexicon. And that's what it's always meant to black people for almost 100 years now.
By the late 80s, woke was showing up in black art, like Spike Lee's classic film, School Days.
Wake up!
And later, given new electricity by neo-soul artist Erykah Badu after the killings of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown. And in 2020, woke crossed over from black culture to the mainstream, following the murder of George Floyd.
No one was talking about woke as much as we have in the last 2 years, right? This was in speak in the black community. I think there was a lot of terror in seeing what was happening in 2020, seeing the multi-racial, multi-ethnic coalitions of people who really rallied around like understanding more about anti-blackness, understanding more about systemic racism.
Today, woke has become an ideological lightning rod and dividing line, a warhead in the latest culture wars.
Once it became like political football, particularly as we see with the GOP, it seemed like a mass message went out. Wokeness is what we're targeting.
They mean it as a slur, but the people who are for these policies, for these specific goals, who think that I want my children to learn about the history of this country and not just the white history of this country, that's not a slur to me. And if you call it woke or whatever you call it, I am proud of representing those things and I want them in policy.
So woke has become this phrase that means everything and nothing at all. But for many people in the community who grew up saying stay woke to make sure you keep your eyes open to some of the forces that have been oppressing black folks in this country, this is concerning that now this word has been weaponized against the very community and those who support the community who created it in the first place.
Yeah, it was extraordinary to hear Leadbelly 100 years ago singing about the Scottsboro Boys using the stay woke. So as you say, this has become a catch-all. And we hear it from school board meetings, and we hear it around Bud Light, and we hear it, this idea of wokeism. What do you think it means to a Trump supporter or to a Republican voter who really has latched on to this idea?
You know, it's part of the playbook that we've seen time and again is really who controls the narrative. And I think for many people who are afraid of the changes in America, and we have this conversation all the time, that America is changing. It's getting more black. It's getting more immigrant. The accents are changing a little bit. It's scary for a lot of people. And so to use this as kind of a battering ram, a cudgel, but also a rallying cry, saying we have to fight these forces. And it's this wokeness. Many of these people have never heard that term used in any other context besides the one they're being fed right now. The bullets came in on this side.
This is my daughter's window right here.
These right here, these are bullet holes. Last December, 49-year-old Latasha Smith says she was shot in the forearm when bullets fired from outside of her apartment crashed into her Jackson, Mississippi home.
The bullet caught me right here.
Officials say the shots were fired by a Mississippi Capitol police officer who was chasing people after they fled a suspected stolen car. This summer, Mississippi will expand the jurisdiction of its state-run police force from the downtown Capitol complex to all of Jackson under two new controversial laws passed by the Republican-led majority-white legislature. House Bill 1020 and Senate Bill 2343 will essentially create a new justice system within Jackson with its own unelected municipal court and expanded Capitol Police force that the city has no control over. Some in Jackson, which is more than 80% black, say the move diverts power away from the voting citizens of Jackson, amounting to a state-led takeover of criminal justice in the city.
This is about vote dilution.
NAACP President Derek Johnson is a longtime Jackson resident.
It is not a solution for the state to step in without any true coordination, conversation, and usurp the authority of the city of Jackson.
The civil rights group is suing the state to block the laws, claiming Jackson's residents have been targeted for a separate and unequal policing and criminal justice system.
Law and order is critical.
Governor Tate Reeves denies any attempt to take power away from Jackson, adding the laws are meant to improve safety and prosperity.
I've lived in Jackson for almost a third of my life, and I want what's best for Jackson.
The battle over public safety and criminal justice comes as the city is experiencing a sharp rise in violence. Last year, 138 people were killed in Jackson, the highest per capita homicide rate in the nation, according to Jackson Police and FBI records. Bishop Dwayne Pickett agrees there is a need for more police, just not like this.
They're not answerable to the mayor, who looks like us. They're not answerable to the structure inside of our community.
Mississippi Department of Public Safety Commissioner Sean Tyndall, who oversees the Capitol Police, told us the agency is working to build trust in the community.
I want to be engaged with the public. I want our officers to be engaged with the public. And I want them to trust, that they're going to do their job and they're going to do it with good training.
In many states, a separate agency is called to investigate police shootings. But here, the same public safety officials who oversee the police are investigating the police and the several officer-involved shootings that have occurred since they began expanding last summer. Among them is the fatal shooting of 25-year-old Jalen Lewis during a traffic stop in September. Also under investigation, the shooting that injured Latasha Smith.
This is a black community, and all these apartments was filled with people. What gave him the right to come in this community shooting?
Responding to concerns we told him we heard from Jackson residents, Commissioner Tyndall said the department is working on being more transparent.
Once those investigations are complete, not only are the videos going to be made public, but the investigative files of the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation will be made public.
Smith says she has more questions, but she won't be in Jackson while she waits for answers.
I went today after work looking for a house to move in and get out of Jackson, Mississippi, because I refuse to stay anywhere Capitol Police would be involved.
When I asked Commissioner Tyndall about the shooting of Latasha Smith, he said the investigation is ongoing and declined to comment further. In the meantime, Latasha Smith and her lawyers have filed a lawsuit against the Capitol Police Department and its commanders, accusing them of acting recklessly and using excessive, unreasonable force against her. Trymaine Lee, NBC News.
You're here on the southwest corner of 22nd and Strand, where the Juneteenth story began.
It's been 157 years since the very first Juneteenth celebration, here on the island of Galveston in Texas, where the last of America's enslaved black people were finally freed. Sam Collins is the co-chair of the Juneteenth Legacy Project.
We're at the Colored Church on Broadway, where the Union soldiers would have moved through the city and posted the notice, General Order Number 3, on the door here.
General Order Number 3 required absolute equality, but for Galveston's black community, equality has been anything but absolute.
People talk about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, but there were many communities that were successful outside of those stories of places that were destroyed. Galveston was one of those thriving communities.
He says low-paying jobs, a rising cost of living, young and middle-class black folks fleeing for better opportunities elsewhere, all drained historic neighborhoods. And then, in 2008, a near-death blow to the black community, Hurricane Ike.
Tonight, Galveston is a soaked and shattered disaster zone.
75% of Galveston's houses and other buildings were taken out by the storm, including nearly 600 units of public housing. The primarily black residents who lived there had no choice but to relocate. Between 2000 and 2010, Galveston's black population plummeted by 37%. The city was eventually forced by the federal government to bring some public housing units back. Then came the pandemic. As struggling families dislocated, Galveston drew in wealthy investors.
So many of the homes that used to be occupied by Black families are now short-term rentals.
Black families moving in?
No, I have almost never heard of any Black families moving in at all.
Generations of June Pulliam's family grew up in Galveston, in this century-old clapboard house by the Gulf. I recognize this front porch.
Yes, that's the front porch of where we are now. This is my great-grandfather, Ralph Albert Skoll, who was 5 the year of Juneteenth.
Folks used to call this place Island of Color, a name that's faded with time.
I guess what's at stake is just the preservation of this very important history. They made homes for themselves, they educated themselves, they formed organizations.
I want to bring back Black folks having some economic influence on the island.
Longtime resident Anthony Griffin is breathing new life into old Black Galveston.
We want to put commercial development there, place a hotel on the other side of the street. We own 3 or 4 lots on the other side.
His plan? Buy up as much land as he can to house and employ families still fighting for the true freedom that was promised.
If you don't have economic opportunity, if you don't own land, if you're not able to participate fully in the American dream, you can't ever have absolute equality.
Mika, despite everything this community is going through, they are resolute and strong in trying to make sure they hold on to everything they built over the years. But because of these economic forces, these natural forces, folks are struggling, but they're standing strong, Mika. 82-year-old Marvin Dunn is leading what he calls Teach the Truth tours across Florida, taking students and their families on an exploration of Florida's Black past. They're stopping at historical markers and cemeteries, visiting burial sites of people murdered in white supremacist violence, their stories buried for decades. High school junior Morgan Everett joined the tour with her mother, sister, and cousins.
It has changed the way I think, the way I see slavery, the way I see our Black people in America.
Older folks like me have been trying to wake these young people up for years. Now they are awake.
Dunn is sharing his passion for Black history with new urgency as the Stop Woke Act, signed by Governor Ron DeSantis last year, takes hold in Florida's K-12 public schools.
We are not going to teach our students to hate this country or to hate each other.
History comes with pain, but to avoid that is to avoid the truth, is to avoid reconciliation.
The law does not mention specific events or people. Instead, it bans the way certain lessons can be taught, especially when it comes to race, gender, or sexuality, telling educators, in part, instruction may not be used to indoctrinate or persuade. Because it's vague on specifics, Dunn and other educators believe the law will force them to water down history.
There's no way to teach history without having the emotional aspect of it included. And once you try to take that out of it, you don't have history anymore.
Out on the tour, the group visits Live Oak, where they learn about 15-year-old Willie James Howard, a Black teen who was kidnapped and lynched in the Swanee River in 1944 after he wrote a love letter to a white girl. At 15, you're the same age that boy was when he was killed. That has to sit with you in some deep way.
It was definitely. When I touched his headstone, I really felt a sense of serenity and gratitude. That could have been me.
We shall overcome.
At Greenwood Cemetery, they honor a Black man named Julius July Perry. He and others died in the November 1920 Ocoee Massacre, a ruthless election day purge of Black citizens who were trying to exercise their right to vote. A century later, Governor DeSantis signed a new education measure requiring schools to study how to include the Ocoee Massacre in Black history education.
The Ocoee Massacre is the only anti-Black action in Florida that is required students to learn.
Since 1994, Florida has been one of a few states to mandate the study of Black history in public schools. But some Black parents worry the laws don't do enough, so they seek out events like Dunn's Teach the Truth tour to fill in what they see as gaps in their children's education and their own.
Now I said, son, have you ever heard about the Ocoee incident? He said, no, mommy. I said, neither have I. To know that back then in the 1920s, there were prosperous African Americans, it shows that we've always been successful, but those stories are hidden from us.
We asked all 67 Florida public school districts how they teach African American history. About a third responded, giving us details on their curricula. But according to the Florida Department of Education's African American History Task Force, only 11 of the districts overall qualify as exemplary, meaning they meet the state's criteria for African American history instruction.
Come on down, guys.
The tour ends at Dunn's property in Rosewood, where in 1923, a white woman's lie about being assaulted by a black man led to a racist massacre and a black town destroyed. He wants to build a memorial park here and eventually a museum.
I have never done anything in my life more serious than this.
For now, he's vowing to keep giving students the nitty-gritty on history, planting seeds he hopes will blossom into a brighter future. Mika, Mr. Dunn is pushing forward, but I think we can never underestimate just how powerful a force as an organizing tool this moment is. These black families and educators are making sure that these gaps are filled regardless of what the governor does. Mika.
Talking about it as an organizing force, the whole move by Governor DeSantis to incorporate black history in the Stop Woke kind of thing that he's doing. And as you know, I've been down there rallying with some of the ministers. But my father is from Florida. Do you think that the Governor DeSantis, and I'm saying that from personal experience, do you think he underestimates how deep this goes with a lot of black Floridians and others, that they are really going to organize like Mr. Dunn and fight back? I think he thought this might have been a surface issue that is a lot deeper than that. Did you get that in your report?
I think so, Reb. As you know, throughout history, black Americans in particular, every barrier to democracy we have broken through and pushed even harder. And so I think to try to set up these restrictions, these folks aren't naive. They're not unsophisticated in understanding how this system works and the barbs thrown against them. But without question, I'm not sure if he recognizes just how strong of a force this pushback really is. Folks are demanding something better for their children, but also for themselves.